Hey guys, SGT here. Thanks for joining us again today. We have a very special guest. It's Jan Skoyles. She's the head of research at the Real Asset Company, and she does a lot of great writing, all of which we post at SGT Report. Also on the line are Rory and Peter. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Peter and Rory?
Howdy.
Hello.
Now, this little thing called Skype is such a pleasure because I know that you are not located in the United States. You are over in London, is that right?
Yeah, that's where we're based. That's not where I'm talking to you from at the moment, but that's where our company is based. We work in the heart of the city of London. I've actually come out to the country for the weekend, so I'm staying with my mum this weekend.
Guys, Jan has been a guest on Max Kaiser's show, The Kaiser Report. Her work has been picked up at Kitco, GATA, LouRockwell.com, The Telegraph, and of course SGT Report. And we're just real gratified to have her on the line today. Jan, tell us a little bit about how you got into this precious metals investing.
Oh God! Well, how long have you got? So I was doing an economics degree at university here in the UK, and I was just feeling very frustrated that it whilst I was in love with the subject, I wasn't in love with the way it was being taught to us and the theories, because to me it felt like there were no people in the economic theories that we were being taught. But I stuck with it for whatever reason, but my gut told me to stick with it. And then one summer when I was just doing some temp work, administrative work in a hedge fund in the city, I met Ned Naylor Leyland, who may be a familiar name to you. And he cornered me at the photocopier and said, "I hear you're an economics student." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "This is what you're going to do your dissertation on." And he, within 10 minutes, had described to me the story of gold and silver, basically. And it sounded very interesting. And I thought, yeah, all right, then I'll do my dissertation, which I think you would know is a thesis there in the US, on gold and silver and the gold standard and how precious metals work in a monetary system. And for the first 3 months, it was just that. It was just an academic, subject to be looking at. And then in the January, Ned held a conference called the Sound Money Conference for Cheviot, which is who he works for. And I sat there, and for several hours, I watched James Turk, David Morgan, some big names, Hugo Salinas Price, all stand up and give talks. And I just sat and I just absorbed all of it. And at the end of the day, I pulled Ned to one side and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I have to be involved in this world. And it was, I don't want to sound too overdramatic or Hollywood about it, but it really was a kind of epiphany moment. And I just thought, this is just the most exciting thing. And this was the first time that economics had really kind of rocked my world, as it were. And I just wanted to be there. And so Ned turned to me and said, "Skoylesy," which is what he calls me, "then we'll just have to find you a job." And from there, I spoke to lots of different companies. And then I discovered the Real Asset Company. They were just starting out. And what a great opportunity, straight out of university. And I get to do what I do every day. And I walk over London Bridge and I look at the city of London and all these grey faces. And I think, oh, you all hate your jobs. And I just get to do this job. And it's just the best job in the world.
What a fantastic story. Guys, you can find the website, The Real Asset Company. It's therealasset.co.uk. So, Jan, help us flush that out. Are you saying that previous to this epiphany about precious metals, gold specifically, economics didn't really make sense to you in the way that the story is told by the powers that be? Because that was my experience. Once I woke up to the idea of fractional reserve banking, once I woke up to this idea that a small group of very, very wealthy men own these things we call central banks and basically dictate monetary policy to governments, which are supposed to be by and for the people, at least in this country. Once I woke up to that, then I saw the world in a different light. But prior to that, economics seemed very complicated and very boring.
I'm even more ashamed to say that before I discovered gold and silver and started, learning the story behind all of it, that I wouldn't have even, if you'd said to me what's fractional reserve banking, I probably wouldn't have even been able to explain that to you. My issue with economics was that the theories we were being taught, I just couldn't see how they were relevant in the real world. And it was more that an economist would dictate how the people would behave rather than looking at how people generally behave in a marketplace. And I also frustrated me that you thought, well, if this is healthy competition, why are governments constantly having to get involved in it? That was my biggest issue with it. Then when I started writing my dissertation, I then came to those issues that you just mentioned, and it just seemed very peculiar to me that having not had these central banks and a small group of people controlling things for what is basically hundreds, if not thousands of years, and we've developed and come so far in that time, why in the last 100 years is there suddenly a need for it? That was where I came. And the fact that economics that I was taught, not once were we ever taught any history, because it's so new. The Keynesian and monetarism that we're taught at university, it's not been played out yet. Well, we haven't seen the results. It's being played out at the moment. So that was my biggest, is there wasn't a story behind it. There wasn't evidence behind it, good hard evidence. That was where I came to it from. And that's why I am a big fan of gold and silver as both, monetary metals, but also good investment metals, is because they have time on their side.
And Peter and Rory, jump in any time, but let me ask Jan this. The CFTC just announced that after 5 years of investigating, they've drawn the conclusion that there is no manipulation in the silver market. You had mentioned other folks who we have interviewed, James Turk, David Morgan, people that have been in this gold and silver space for far longer than a decade even, Mike Maloney, the folks at GATA. What is your take as somebody to whom this information is really newer? It's fresher to you. I mean, you really started to get engaged in this space around 2010. What is your take on this CFTC decision that they say that there just is no manipulation?
As someone new to it, I think in a lot of ways, my first instinct was, why does it matter? Because the key is to just hold gold and silver, whatever. But of course it matters, because, it's wrong. But also my first instinct was, well, why isn't it being manipulated? Because everything else is being manipulated. We already know that, for instance, LIBOR. So I don't have a huge amount of surprise. At the same time, I do still hold this naivety that I would still like to believe that associations are supposed to act how they are. So the CFTC should still act honestly. And I know that sounds naive. And so when the decision came out the other day, there was a part of me that was a bit disappointed that they hadn't, actually done what they were supposed to do. But there was a great interview with James Turk the other day saying that, well, actually the Gold Act of 1934 basically says that they can be doing what they're doing at the moment. So you shouldn't be surprised by this decision. And I just stand by with what I always say about gold and silver manipulation if it's going on. As long as you have the gold and you know where the gold is, that gold is still there and it's still valuable. And so if they're pushing the price low, then just, enjoy it whilst it's going on, because you can be, accumulating more at what's potentially a lower price. But I'm not saying it's a good thing, just to be clear. Sure. But, use it to your advantage whilst it's going on.
Oh, I agree. I think if you're awake to this system and you understand the value of hard assets, tangible assets, physical precious metals as opposed to precious metals in paper form or anything else in paper form, be it stocks, bonds, things of that nature, yeah, absolutely. This is an opportunity to purchase these tangible assets far more cheaply than they should otherwise be priced at. I think your outlook is spot on, but I do know it gets very tiresome for those in this community who made investments in physical silver, for instance, at 15, 20, and then up there like I did at 40, 45, to be suffering these prices down at 20, 22, 23. It feels terribly unfair. It feels like, where is the justice in this system for those that really made the right decision to embrace tangible assets, to embrace physical gold and silver? When will it be our day to shine?
I do sympathise with that, and I think it was something I was reading the other day, and it said it very beautifully that gold and silver. The beauty of gold and silver is time is on our side, with gold and silver, and I do understand that it's frustrating, and I like you said, I haven't been in this space very long, and I think the manipulation thing is something that has to be talked about because it is so frustrating. But I think you've just got to think that there is so many other factors playing out in these markets. We can talk about QE or tapering or the Asian gold demand. Something is gonna bust the cog that's making all this go round at the moment. And so I think the manipulation thing is frustrating, but there are so many other factors that affect the gold and silver prices. Something is going to have to bust it out of the water, as it were, to kind of bring it back to where it's supposed to be.
You mentioned Asia right there, and I see Asia being the wild card to busting out, like we're saying, and they're just taking all the physical gold and silver, and with all the taxes and everything that's going on with India in particular, they have shifted to silver because, well, we don't know what's going on with gold in India because it's all being smuggled in at this point, so we can't see any of the information, any of the data as far as the movement. But with silver, there was a report out the other day that there was like a 311% increase in the importation of silver into India. And once again, we don't know, or maybe you do know, Jan, the importation information regarding China with silver. And we have a good idea that what's going on with gold in China. They're just buying it all. They're just taking everything that they can. And I'd like to get your take on what's happening with China and the Shanghai Gold Exchange in particular, and with what's happening with India. And I know it's a very broad question, but
well, in many ways, I don't think it is such a broad question, because I was thinking about gold and silver the other day, and I was thinking, since I joined the real asset company, I think 2 days before gold hit the all-time high, and since then, it feels like not very much has happened with gold. But in this past year, in the last 9 months, so much has happened with gold in terms of India and China. You know, like you say, this is probably where that key area is that's going to really let the gold and silver markets shine. In terms of the silver import numbers, I don't have them to hand, and I'm sorry, you know, if I come on again, then I'll try and have them to hand. But I think the Chinese and Indian demand is fascinating, because they're just consuming so much gold, but we don't see the supply of gold going up. So there's a lot of questions being asked in terms of central banks. What I'd also mainly like to draw attention to in terms of China and India is that I think the gold and to some extent silver markets at the moment are very US centric. Everyone's just talking about three things, you know, the debt ceiling, the budget issue, and tapering. But meanwhile, in China and India, they genuinely don't give a crap about these things. They don't care. You know, and it's like it's this great kind of, well, what Goldman says seems to be more important than what the people of China and India are doing. Okay, India's had this clampdown on gold imports, but as you just alluded to, the smuggling that's going on is just unbelievable. And it's just come out, I don't know, yesterday or today, but basically the smuggling ring's been busted in one of the biggest airports in India. So everyone is involved in this gold smuggling that's going on. So their appetite's not going to relax for gold. And as you say, but to some extent it's been substituted for silver. And in China, they're just importing huge amounts of both metals. You know, and I think there's a huge amount to be learned there, because all the fundamentals that mean that you should be buying gold and silver exist only for gold and silver. They don't for physical gold and silver. They don't exist for all these big products, you know, that are driving the price of gold and for the manipulation that's going on. And these are the only things that China and India are looking at. They don't care if Goldman Sachs suddenly say, oh, well, the gold price is going down, which, by the way, they only do when they realize what the Fed may or may not do. You know, they don't. Funnily enough, all of these predictions just come out when we already know what's going to happen, which I'm not sure why it's ever called a prediction. Whereas India and China, they're not looking at those things. They're just doing what they do best, and that's buying the physical. And that's why it's key, because one of the reasons we like gold and silver is because they're finite. That's why we buy them. And China and India are aware of that, and they're just hoarding it. And if anything, they're the ones taking advantage of this, you know, artificially low price at the moment. And I think it can only get bigger. China's just overtaken India as the world's largest consumer, but we've still got a good few months of the year with big festivals in India, wedding seasons, and of course now that they've finally sorted out all the mess around the import duty, we'll probably see the demand increase there again. And sorry, I'm going on a bit, but in terms of the Shanghai Gold Exchange, wow, isn't that one to watch, because they're also going to be adding a few more contracts there. Their delivery numbers are just phenomenal. And again, it shows that the way that people are buying gold in these countries are so very different to how we're used to in the West. But also what I find very interesting is the patterns we see in China and India in terms of demand are being reflected in companies such as ours here in the West that sell physical gold. So I do think everyone that buys physical gold is behaving exactly the same way, no matter where you are in the world.
So what, if I understand you correctly, what you just said is that China is buying gold through the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the physical form, and it's directly impacting the real asset company in London. Is that right?
No, it's not directly impacting. What I'm saying is that what we see in the demand, when we saw demand pick up between April and June, particularly in China, that was reflected. We also saw a pickup in demand with our Western consumers here in the UK. I'm saying that people that want to buy physical are behaving in exactly the same manner. If you're alluding to supply issues that we did hear about through China, we didn't come across any issues with that.
If I may, Jan, let me ask you about one of your recent articles here, how one man took China's gold. And I think you guys touched on this a bit with the Shanghai Gold Exchange. But I'd kind of like your take on silver as an investment for the common man. Because when you start to talk about all of the gold that's been mined from the beginning of human history until now, you get things like Yamashita's gold, a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of theories out there about how much gold there really is. Whereas with physical silver, it seems to be more finite. There seems to be far less, certainly governmental stores. Whereas the U.S. government used to have hundreds of millions of ounces of silver, it now has 0. Let's talk a little bit about your article and also give us your take on physical silver as an asset, a tangible asset for the common man.
Okay, well, the article that you talked about is, as you say, the one man who took China's gold. And I was very careful to say took rather than stole, because it was a political issue that the gold was moved because of. But it was an absolutely fascinating story about how one man who was head of the Nationalist Party smuggled over the course of 1 year all of China's gold reserves to Taiwan. And it was only really reported because it just so happened there was a British journalist watching over his office, looked down on the square and the port where the Treasury and the central bank were sat. And he managed to export them all by ship and by plane. And I highly recommend anyone read the story. I've been looking quite a lot into how various countries lost their gold, and they're absolutely fascinating when you find out just a couple of people were involved, and the risks that people take to get gold again shows just how valuable these metals have been throughout history. We did another one a while ago about Poland and how it was to do with the British sea captain who helped to get the gold safely out of Poland away from the Nazis. And so I think these stories, I refer to them as stories, these are key pieces in gold and silver's history, because they do show how important they are and how, when there's a chance your country is going to be invaded or the monetary system is going to be affected, people go for the gold because it is such a faithless currency. And that's the main thing that I would hope people take away from these stories that I sort of, research and write about. In terms of silver, earlier on we were talking about how I got into gold and silver, and I told you that I'd written a dissertation on them both being used in the monetary system. And my conclusion as to how you could move to a sound monetary system was I saw it very much as a triangle. With at the top you have companies and corporations trading in gold, and down at the bottom of the pyramid in day-to-day life you have silver being used. And there have been several proposals, my favourite of which was Hugo Salinas Price suggesting that silver was used in China to try and reduce inflation, and it's an excellent article, and I suggest everyone reads it at his website, which is I think platter.com. In terms of silver as an investment, I do suspect that in terms of performance, silver will go on to outperform the gold price. Historically, over the last 2,000 years or so, the gold-silver ratio has been 16 to 1, I think maybe over 90% of the time. So if gold's over $1,600 an ounce, then silver is likely to be $100 an ounce if it was to come down to this sort of historical trend that it's always maintained. But of course, that would mean that silver would have to increase by fourfold in order to do that. So whether or not it's going to get there is a tricky one, but I think we will get closer to that ratio. Of course, at the moment it's about 60 to 1. But in terms of the industrial demand, it's increased dramatically. I think about 53%, I think, of silver is used in industry. The ETFs of silver hasn't changed anywhere near as dramatically as gold holdings in ETFs have. And I think in terms of performance and affordability, silver's your man. And we do have a lot of clients on our platform that just invest purely in silver. And a lot of the greatest commentators out there are huge silver bugs and see more potential for silver than they do gold. And it makes sense because it is a hugely industrial metal. Like you said earlier on, both of them are finite, but silver is destroyed at a far quicker rate than gold is. And so I think it is a good buy, because particularly when the economy is performing well, silver's being used up in industry, and when it's not doing well, it's hopefully following gold. And I find silver actually, to some extent, a lot more interesting in terms of the day-to-day factors.
Let me ask you a follow-up question about disappearing gold. If Chiang Kai-shek played a role in taking China's gold to Taiwan, do I have that right?
Yep.
Okay. If that happened, and if it was just a few people involved in that theft or the taking of that gold, certainly the same could be true with the gold in Fort Knox, which is said to still be there, although it hasn't been audited since, I think, 1954. Have you done any research, or what is your gut feeling about the gold in Fort Knox? Do you think that there's any plausible chance that it's still there?
Um, like I said earlier on, I like to be naive sometimes, particularly when it's my weekend and I'd like to relax about the state of the world and say that it is still there. But you've got to ask so many questions. Why hasn't it been audited for so long? Why can't Germany get back their gold all in one go? Just all these, and where's all this supply been coming from over the last few years, the leasing that's going on. So I think you'd be naive to kind of think, no, it's all still there. Everything that's supposed to be is there. And in terms of few people involved, I'm sure that if anything's going on, which there probably is, that it is only a few people involved, or else there would be an uproar. Here in the UK, I know it doesn't seem like it, but whenever you just tell kind of Joe Blogs down at the pub, that you work in gold, they instantly go, oh, but I didn't think there was any gold left because Gordon Brown sold it all. And okay, fine, we haven't been protesting on the streets about the fact that Gordon Brown sold our gold, but it has struck a chord in people that happened. And so if more people were to be aware, if there were a lot of people involved in the Fort Knox thing, I can't believe it wouldn't by now be public knowledge, because it is such an emotive subject and people are aware that countries should hold gold reserves. So there must only be a few people involved, I'm sure of it.
What I'd like to ask you, Jan, is here in the States, less than 1% of the people own any precious metals other than maybe jewelry. And I'm wondering, what's your feeling as far as what does that number look like on your side of the world? What would you estimate the percentage of people who hold precious metals? First, among your family, friends, circle of influence, and then just general population of your country. And then just kind of following up personally, what's your percentage of silver and gold that you hold in your personal holdings?
In terms of, do you mean when the holdings of gold for friends and family and people, do you mean jewelry or do you mean as investments?
I mean as investments.
As investments.
Right.
I'd say it's as low a number then as in the US. In terms of my friends and family, I suspect it's significantly higher since I started not shutting up about this stuff. They probably bought it just so I would be quiet, not because I've necessarily convinced them. But so certainly their holdings have gone up. And what's interesting is they didn't just, those people in my family that have bought gold and silver haven't just bought it and left it. They've been quietly accumulating, just sort of, just having a standing order and buying a bit every month, treating it like a savings account. But I do suspect that in the general public, holding gold and silver is as low as the US. I know across Europe it's a wee bit higher, particularly in places such as Germany or other places that were involved in the Second World War, because it's a bit more ingrained in them. But the general kind of public sentiment is, I would say, that they know that they should hold gold. I'm not very comfortable commenting on silver because I don't think I've ever really had that direct conversation with someone. They know they should hold gold. Very few people know how to hold gold. They think it's expensive. And the first thing they jump to is that Gordon Brown sold it. He shouldn't have sold it, but he must have sold it for a good reason. Mm-hmm. And again, but when you start talking to people about events such as the war, they are all aware that when people were escaping the Nazis, that they fled with gold. And so when you talk to them about this, they're like, oh yeah, that's right. But there is still a real barrier to what we would call conversion in getting them to understand how to make that leap.
I think the propaganda works still on the majority of people who don't understand real economics, like we discussed earlier in the interview, and so they buy the Mockingbird media propaganda or the Mockingbird economist propaganda that gold is a barbarous relic, and I think there's also a normalcy bias that people grasp or continue to hold on to, which is this idea that we haven't had precious metals as our money in decades, so clearly it's just an outdated concept. I think a lot of people understand that gold has intrinsic value and they appreciate it on sort of a fundamental level. It's like baked into their DNA. They know it's worth money, and yet they can't bring themselves to trade their paper money for it because it doesn't compute. It's
yeah, I agree with that, but I also think, following on from that, there is this mentality of, if I'm good, they see now films and programs about people making a quick buck just by trading, maybe buying Apple shares or or the Vodafone thing that's happening here in the UK, they think that they should immediately get a return. It also ties in with this kind of celebrity culture at the moment. Things like the X Factor or Pop Idol. Things should happen instantly for people. And so when you talk about investing in gold and silver, whenever I talk to anyone, particularly my friends and family, I say you need to kind of just put this to one side and forget about it for a few years. And that's not in people's investing mentality now. So it's quite key to get people to understand that you should just have something put aside for a rainy day. And also people are used to being paid dividends, and of course gold and silver don't do that, and they don't see that actually it's just like having cash in the bank, but safer. But in terms of what you do with it, it's just there, it's just sat there, just leave it. It's not kind of shares or anything like that. And I think it's this change in this investment mentality we've seen, particularly in my generation, where we just want instant results happening.
Yeah, that's a great point. People see others get rich quick with stocks like Apple, and they want in on that kind of momentum. I think early on with silver, that was the feeling, as people saw it go from 10, 12, 14 on up to 30 plus and then ultimately 50. That momentum drew a lot of people in who have since been injured by the manipulation and have been injured by the falling prices in these metals, only psychologically, because of course, as long as they don't sell that precious tangible asset, it will have value for another 5,000 years. Before we let you go, I do want to get your thought on the current silver price, Jan, because you mentioned that at $1,600 gold, the historic norm, the 16-to-1 historic, 2,000, 4,000 year history of silver would suggest the price should be around $100 an ounce. Whether or not the CFTC is right, and I don't think they are, that silver is manipulated, that argument aside, if we look at historical norms, we have to conclude that at $1,400 gold, $22 silver is one heck of a bargain. Is that still true? Because a lot of people accuse us of just, talking our book. But that's not the truth. We got into precious metals on this end at SGT Report as an honorable way to divest from this criminal system. I see it as a bargain, but like you, I can be accused of talking my book as well. But I do see it as a bargain because, like you say, we've seen it at highs historically. This isn't where it's performed. We have got issues with the CFTC and manipulation going on. And also, silver, the paper silver floating around in the market is unbelievable. I think it's worse than gold in terms of the ratios. So in terms of a kind of ticking time bomb, silver's an even bigger one, and the fuse is even shorter on it. So I do think it's a bargain at the moment, quite frankly. And someone earlier on asked me about my allocation. I'd say 50-50 for gold and silver, because I do have that much faith in the silver price. What a fantastic way to end the interview. And I think we may have just
That's not my portfolio allocation. That's just to one another. Obviously, I have money in other things. Just to make that clear, I don't go out and spend my gold and silver.
Oh, sure. Well, I was just going to say, I think maybe we hit on a title for this one. The silver price is a ticking time bomb. So
great. There we are then.
Yeah, that was yours, Jan.
That was
Jan. Well, Jan, can you just remind everybody where they can find your work? Certainly they can find it at sgtreport.com, where we are very careful to post all of your latest writings. Can you tell people how to find you otherwise on the internet?
Well, you can find all of my writings, if SGT Report have been lazy and not put it up, at therealasset.co.uk. And you can also find me on Twitter. I am at Skoylesy. So that's my last name with a Y at the end.
You are fun. We like you. Peter, did you have any final questions or anything that we missed that you wanted to touch on?
No, she covered it all. Thanks so much, Jan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. That was very enjoyable. We do appreciate your time. Everybody visit therealasset.co.uk. And Jan Skoyles has been our guest. Thanks again for your time. Thanks for taking time away from your mom to speak with us.
My mom, yeah. So, okay. Well, now we're going to the pub, so maybe that'll make you laugh as well.
I love the pub.
All right.
Yeah, we love the pub here, too.
Good.
Except we like our beer cold. Don't you all like your beer room temperature in the pub?
We like beer how it's supposed to be, about how we invented it here in the UK.
Exactly.
You go with Harp or Bass or what?
None of those. We go for good local breweries.
Oh, man.
The hottest beer to be drinking in London at the moment is Greenwich Mean Time beer, which is brewed literally right next to the sort of the timeline, meridian line. That's what you need to be drinking. If you want to be cool in London, that's what you need to be on.
Are those nice and bitter?
Yeah, it's quite bitter. It's quite a dark ale as well.
Awesome.
So, and the warmer the better.
Yes. And Jan, when we do come to London to go to the pub to have a beer with you, we do want to be cool, so we will have some of that Greenwich Mean Time beer with you.
Okay. By the way, if any of my friends heard that I was trying to be cool, then they would just laugh. So don't come and see me if you want to be cool, but we can pretend for a while.
Well, I love your sense of humor. Did you guys catch how she fired a shot across our bow too when she said if SGT Report is being lazy, you can catch my latest at therealasset.com.
I picked up on that.
You're a lot of fun. Thank you, Jan.
Take care. Thank you very much. It's been good fun.